Okay, so part 2 of Attack on Titan Season 4 had more deaths than all the previous seasons combined, and in this video we're about to go through each episode to work out how many people won't be making it to part 3. In order for a death to be included in the kill count, the only criteria is that it needs to either be shown on screen or referenced by another character, but sometimes we'll also be using common sense to add to the number depending on the context. Before we begin, don't forget to smash that sub button if you want to see more Attack on Titan content like this, and if you're new to the channel, then be sure to check out the kill count video from last year that covered the first 16 episodes. Okay, so episode 17 begins with the Marleyan army invading Shiganshina, and the anime did a great job of showing how brutal this war actually was. For example, around halfway through, the Marleyeans just start unloading onto the scouts, and this scene helped to demonstrate the huge difference in resources between the two sides. I reckon at least 100 eldians were taken out in this moment by itself, and it's crazy to imagine how high the kill count would have been if civilians hadn't already been evacuated. Later in the episode, the carnage continues with the Marleyan soldiers launching grenades at unsuspecting scouts, and as far as I could tell, the Survey Corps were only able to injure one single Marleyan in response. Overall, this opening episode for part 2 was a one-sided massacre, but luckily things start to turn around in episode 18 thanks to the arrival of Zeke. After being saved from the brink of death by Ymir, the Beast Titan makes this grand entrance where he wipes out 5 of Marley's airships. In terms of pure numbers, this would be around 50 casualties, considering that the vast majority of soldiers had already parachuted into the district. Zeke then follows up by changing his target to the Marleyeans on the ground, and by doing this he helped to clear a path for Eren to reach him. However, before the two of them are able to make contact, the Cart Titan fakes her own death, which causes both Zeke and the yeagerists to let their guard down. In the process, nearly the entire group of yeagerists on Marlyean were ambushed, with Floch being the sole survivor, and at the same time, Magath gets a clean shot that tears through half of the Beast Titan's spine. Meanwhile, Armin, Mikasa and the other prisoners were freed from their cells and allowed to fight, directly leading to several Marleyan soldiers getting blown up by thunder spears. At this stage, the war was slowly turning into more of an even contest, and in a weird way, things got better for the scouts once Zeke turned half their army into pure titans. Although it is sad that Pixis and the rest of them were turned into monsters, it's undeniable that them being pure titans made it way easier to fight back against the invasion. Across Shiganshina, every last Marleyan soldier would either be eaten alive by these things or dealt with by the scouts, with Magath being one of the only regular humans who was able to escape from the front lines. Before we skip too far ahead though, we should probably mention that when Zeke did his scream, the electricity from Falco's Titan fried Colt to a crisp. This death was especially tragic for two reasons. Number one, because Colt was betrayed by a person who was meant to be his mentor, and number two, the warrior candidate sacrificed himself so that he could be with his younger brother as he transformed. Following the transformation, Pure Titan Falco then makes arguably the most significant kill from part 2, as he inherits the Jaw Titan by chewing Galliard to pieces. This was only the second time this season that a Titan Shifter had been killed by someone, but in Porco's case he willingly allowed it to happen since he didn't have enough stamina to heal his existing injuries. Now, after this moment, there weren't any more fatalities for episode 19, besides some random background soldiers getting eaten, but still, it'd be weird to move on without highlighting Eren's near-death experience. In this iconic scene, the Yeager bros were just meters away from making contact, but Gabby, who quite literally never misses a shot, manages to hit his neck with an anti-Titan rifle. This sends Eren's head spinning through the air, and it's undeniable that if he had landed anywhere else other than Zeke's hand, then that would have been the end of Attack on Titan. Fortunately for us, the story continues with both brothers ending up in the past dimension, and in episode 20 the kill count gets added to when Eren convinces Grisha to squash the royal family. In total, this meant the death of 6 people, including 5 of Historia's siblings, but as we know, Rodrice was able to escape so that one day he could be blown up by the scouts instead. Speaking of the royal family, episode 21 takes us 2,000 years into the past, where we get to witness the origin of the royal bloodline. During this backstory, we see that Ymir lived in a tiny village that couldn't have had a population of more than 300, and most of them were wiped out when the eldians chose to invade. Sometime after this, King Fritz used Ymir's founding titan to destroy a small army of Marleyan soldiers, and years later, after she gave birth to Maria, she personally crushes an even larger group of soldiers with her bare hands. These defeats caused the Marleyans to feel a ton of resentment towards the Eldian Empire, and when they arrived to surrender to Fritz, one of the soldiers had pre-planted a spear in the ground which they then used to throw at the king. Unfortunately, Fritz wasn't the one to take the hit as Ymir jumped in the way to protect him, and surprisingly this attack did kill her mainly because she didn't have the will to live. The Marleyan assassin who threw the spear was then sliced to pieces by nearby Eldian guards, and in the manga version of this scene, it's shown that the guards also killed the soldiers who were kneeling next to him. When it comes to King Fritz himself, he ended up on his deathbed presumably due to natural causes, and we know it couldn't have been that long after the assassination attempt since his daughters hadn't really grown much between the two incidents. Switching over to Eren activating the rumbling in the present day, this instantly caused the deaths of thousands of eldians across Paradise Island. The main reason for these deaths was that Eren crumbled all 3 walls without giving people time to prepare, which meant that anyone who lived next to them had a high chance of being crushed. When we take a quick look at this map, Shiganshina was the only town near the walls that had already been evacuated, whereas the remaining districts like Trost and Stoas had extensive casualties, and we saw this in episode 22. A safe estimate would be that around 400 people per district were flattened, which is easily more than 4,000 Eldian deaths caused by Eren overall. Now, back in Shiganshina, Zeke's pure titans had finished eating all the Marleyan soldiers and began turning their attention to the surviving scouts. During the chaos, a handful of scouts were explicitly shown to either be smushed or eaten alive, and you'd have to imagine there were an extra 20 to 30 soldiers we didn't see who probably got the same treatment. Eventually though, Jean was able to lead the scouts to kill every pure titan in the district, with the 2 most significant deaths being Pixis and Nile. In Nile's case, Gabby killed him using the same rifle she used to decapitate Eren, and in Pixis' case, a very sorry Armin had to blow him up using a thunder spear. Following this, the next death came from one of the anti-Marleyan volunteers, who was murdered by Floch to show the other volunteers what could happen. Floch's main goal at this point was to eliminate people on the island who didn't support the Eldian Empire, and of course the volunteers weren't exactly keen on helping, given that Eren was about to destroy their homelands. The volunteer who Floch executed was the most vocal out of the group, and his death did have some kind of impact, as it made Jean question whether he was on the right side. In episode 24, Hanji and Levi were being hunted down by the yeagerists, and while hiding in the forest, the commander tearfully shoots 2 soldiers that were chasing after them. Later on, it's heavily implied that these 2 weren't the only ones they had to kill, and when we flash back to when Hanji first escaped, we do see there was a 3rd person they must have killed off screen. Around halfway through the episode, things then switch over to a random hospital, where Mikasa pays a visit to Louise. While it's true that Louise doesn't die in this exact moment, she reveals that she has shrapnel inside her system, which is basically a death sentence for anyone who doesn't have one of these things. What makes her death especially tragic is that it could have been prevented, because the only reason she got hurt was that she spent too much time staring at Mikasa in the middle of a war zone. It was this distraction that led to her getting caught up in the explosion, but if she'd been paying attention then she'd very likely still be alive. Anyway, moving on, episode 25 was the first and only episode from part 2 not to have a single person die, primarily because most of the runtime was the Alliance having various debates and beating each other up. By the end though, they did eventually make it to the harbour, which is when the kill count dramatically began to increase. For a start, Hanji mentions how the yeagerists have killed 4 people already, referring to the Azumabito engineers who were likely shot by Floch. On top of that, based on the speed of the Titans, the commander worked out that several Marleyan cities on the coast had already been trampled. Although we don't have an exact figure, it's safe to assume that a few coastal cities is equivalent to at least a couple million people. And remember, this doesn't even factor in Liberia. It wasn't until much later on that Hanji realized Liberia would also be crushed as well, which by my estimation adds another 500,000 civilians to the kill count. It's important to remember that Liberia is more than just the people inside the internment zone, as it also has large sections where Marleyeans live and work, not to mention tens of thousands of soldiers who do special training up in the mountains. Now, when it comes to the Alliance, despite Armin trying to take the peaceful path, he couldn't prevent things turning into an all-out war between the scouts and the yeagerists. In the beginning of this war, Hanji and Magath killed 3 yeagerists inside one of the main buildings, while Annie and Reiner pummeled nearly 10 soldiers with their bare hands. Meanwhile, next to the flying boat, Connie made the gut-wrenching choice to execute Daz and Samuel, who are 2 friends that he's known ever since their time in the cadets. Ultimately, Connie had to make this decision in order for the Alliance to have a chance of stopping Eren, and in the background the warriors continued to get a nice amount of kills, with Mikasa joining the action as well. When the fighting first began, she did actually hurt 2 yeagerists already, although it wasn't clear if she killed them, but assuming that she knocked them unconscious, the 2 soldiers would have been blown to pieces when other yeagerists fired into the room. Anyhow, Magath and Hanji added to their kill streaks while the Azumabito tried to escape. However, a train full of Yeagerist reinforcements was heading towards the harbour. In total, there were 9 visible carriages with roughly 15 soldiers each, which we can round out to 150 overall. If those reinforcements had made it to where they needed to be, then the Alliance for sure would have been overwhelmed by the numbers, hence why Instructor Shardis stepped in to blow it up. By doing what he did, he gave the Alliance their final chance of surviving, and in the next scene when Annie and Reiner are about to be killed, Connie saves them by single-handedly wiping out 5 yeagerists. Mikasa follows that up by slicing 4 of them herself, and in total I guess that around 80 plus yeagerists were taken out by this small group of fighters. On one hand, you could argue that it's realistic given that these are the island's best soldiers besides Captain Levi, but personally I did think it was kinda weird that they were able to get through this without anyone being shot or taking serious damage to their human bodies. Regardless, once the battle was over, General Magath stayed behind to make sure the yeagerists wouldn't be able to chase after the Alliance, and in the process, he and Shardis had a bit of a team up. On his introduction, the instructor personally killed a couple of soldiers that were chasing after Magath, and then the two men boarded one of the nearby cruisers. Their plan was to destroy this thing so that the yeagerists couldn't use it, but to do this mission it involved them getting blown up as well. Technically speaking, Shardis had the option to leave the ship and survive if he wanted to, but he already made it clear that he didn't see a future on the island while people like Floch were in charge. As a consequence, both of them die when Magath ignites the gunpowder, and it evaporates everybody on board, including the enemy soldiers. Finally, moving on to the grand finale of part 2, all the casualties in this one came in the last few minutes of the episode. On the Marleyan coast, the global military alliance had assembled the strongest cannons humanity had to offer, and overall, there were over 90 battleships confirmed by this screenshot here. If the average crew size is 120 men per ship, then that's easily 10,000 plus soldiers, not to mention the thousands more who are on dry land. The cannons then begin firing towards the rumbling, and to be fair, they do some damage to the Colossal Titans in the front, but it didn't take a second for the hordes of Titans behind them to overtake. These monsters then swim underneath the ships, causing most of them to be flung into the air by the hot steam, but some unlucky soldiers on board did also get burned up before that happened. Gradually, all 10,000 men would be wiped out when their ships exploded on impact, and on the shore, scores of Marleyan troops begin to abandon their stations. As Eren marches forward, we then get a bird's eye view of the rumbling destroying everything, although the kill count wouldn't be as high as you'd expect, since most of the city had already been evacuated. If there were any civilians, then we would have seen them running in the streets alongside the Marleyan soldiers, but the fact we don't see anyone implies that the only people left were involved with the military. For that reason, the count only increases by about 15,000, but obviously if Eren keeps marching, then he'll eventually catch up to all the civilians who tried to run away. With that said, that is the complete kill count for part 2 of the final season, and like I mentioned in the intro, this is easily more than all the previous seasons combined. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop a like and hit that sub button so you don't miss new uploads like this, and until the next one, peace out.